Now I'm happy to present our next presenter, Iryna Kazakova. Iryna is an environmental economy scientist, sustainable development and permaculture supporter. She has PhD in economic sciences and have been conducting research related to economics and ecological aspects of resource-saving technologies of growing crops, mineral nutrition of plants, traditional use of soil resources, and soil fertility restoration. So currently, she is a coordinator of Ukrainian network of permaculture education and demonstration centers, and she works on increasing public awareness of multifunctional agriculture.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Pablo, for my presentation. You have said everything that I thought to start with. So I would like to thank previous speaker, because probably my presentation will be like continue of answering of the last question about support of state support for eco-intensive technologies. Another thing, as you probably all know, with Pablo Ordano, we are working now on general, something like policy recommendation to promote biodiversity-based agriculture at all, and almost the same recommendation, but focusing on Ukraine. So in this presentation, I would like to clarify some features of Ukrainian agriculture and agrarian legislation, which can help to understand the real situation and possibly to get some advice from you. So we have at least two reasons to develop and promote this recommendation right now. The first is Ukrainians' European integration and Ukraine-European Union relations. And the second is opening of the land market in Ukraine. With regard to European integration, Ukraine has taken on a number of commitments to fulfill the sustainable development goals and has begun the process of implementation European legislation into Ukrainian. Some of them, for example, no poverty, zero hunger, combating the climate change, addressing in Ukrainian legislation on high and medium level, more than 65% at least. And however, the implementation of specific objectives aim at achieving these goals, which are started in various state strategic documents, is often insufficient, particularly due to the lack of mechanism of implementation, monitoring, and control. Regarding to land market, probably land reform is perhaps the most controversial of all the high-profile reforms of recent time. The existence of the moratorium of land sale in Ukraine preserves all the shadow schemes and manipulation that have prevailed in the field of land relations for over 20 years. Ukraine is on par with Venezuela, North Korea, Cuba, and Tajikistan among countries that do not have land market. And this situation for the ordinary landowner is unpleasant because the tenants offer the owners an extremely low cost of rent, and the people themselves cannot sell their land at all. So absence of a market means that it is impossible to determine the real value of the land, and the owners do not know what assets they own. Maybe the most important challenge of land reform is lack of only vision formulated in the government concept. Surveys show that 2/3 of Ukrainians are against the sale of land, but the European Court of Justice claimed that moratorium of the sale of agricultural land is, I would say, is violate human rights. Therefore, we can be sure that the issue of opening the land market is just a matter of time, and that is why before it happens, it will be good to determine priorities for the development of the agricultural sector and our mechanism of greening agriculture. So, what is agriculture in Ukraine? We have certain strengths, large land farms in Ukraine. Nearly 43 million hectares of agricultural land is more than 2/3 of the entire country. High soil fertility, about 40% of all agricultural land is Chernozem. The area of Ukrainian Chernozem is equal to the area of Great Britain, but if only it helped. Probably one of the most important is absence of significant natural disasters in Ukraine, because during the period from 2000 until 2017, losses from natural disease worldwide reached more than $80 billion. Very important, and that share of agricultural production in the gross domestic products in Ukraine is 20%, and this figure is constantly increasing. And last year, agriculture provides 40% of foreign exchange per means. That is mean that almost every second dollar in Ukraine is earnings of the agricultural sectors. So, what are the weaknesses? First of all, is an ability to sell land and receive fair compensation, and underdeveloped infrastructure. Only 20% of all elevators are modern, and despite the high soil fertility in Ukraine, compared to the leading countries, the yield is lower than 40–50% depending on agricultural crops. But we hope that introduction of modern technologies will reduce the yield gap with the leading countries. And one more thing we can be sure of is increase in demand for traditional crops. This trend will be continue in the future. This is the level of regulatory monetary valuation. It's something like price, but not the price. In Ukraine, we can see that it is the lowest in Europe, and not only. Do you remember the answer to the question of life, the universe, and everything? I think that Douglas Adams at the Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy was wrong, because to prevent the collapse of nature, terrestrial ecosystem should be at least 67%. Today they occupy 23–25 in Ukraine at least. The main factor in the destruction of nature in Ukraine and the whole world is agriculture. We can see it from this slide, that land management, especially in the last century, has led to significant changes in landscapes and habitats. It destroyed, in our country, it destroyed steppe as natural biome, some hydrological conditions, anthropogenic pollutions of large territories, including heavy metals, radionuclides, organic compounds, and in a number of regulatory acts, there is there are some rational ways of overcoming this problem. However, implementation of these laws is limited, and voluntary implementation of this recommendation is extremely small. At the same time, Ukraine has a rich biota with more than 25,000 plant species and 45,000 animal species, and due to negative anthropogenic factors, more and more species of animals and plants are at the risk of extinction. You can see that in the first edition of Red Book in Ukraine, will include 150 species of high plants and 85 species of animals. And in the last edition, we can see that it contains just 8 times more species of plants and almost 6 times more species of fauna. It is possible to anticipate and systematize certain groups of threats that may result from biodiversity loss, and probably the main of them is in economic and social spheres, loss of income and well-being of peoples, migration, political and military conflicts. Therefore, it would be quite logical to say that in order to prevent threats to biodiversity arising in agricultural production, it is necessary to change the concept of farming and move to reproduction of agrosystems. So who is responsible? I think that until the conditions and requirements that allow owners to take good care of the land have not been identified, private land ownership, like any other, will remain a threat to biodiversity and ecosystem in general. So we have some state support, and as government and Ministry of Agrarian Policy think that they have priorities is to stimulate farmer movement and create some successful business model in Ukraine. But you can see that main support for the different type of enterprises is aimed at livestock, machinery and equipment, plant growing and lawns. And you can see that organic farming support is not provided at all in any category of agrarians. And for all this category, the mandatory requirements are related to the ownership rights and for the size of the farm, and that's all. I like the example of Argentina. This country has stopped the degradation of soils and increased the profitability of agricultural production due to equalization of soil nutrition use for growing crops to the extraction mineral resources. So I think that we need some economic, administrative, and criminal levers. In comparison to Ukraine, the common agrarian policy, which has been transformed over the years, seems really like a fantastic system, because at least because it basically supports environmental and climate actions. Of course, analyzing a number of studies, it becomes clear that it is also imperfect, but I personally like the idea of supporting those farms that take on certain land management responsibilities. And now we have a good opportunity to develop some mechanism that not only promote eco-intensive technologies, but also limit the use of technologies and actions that are harmful to environment. The main agricultural practices impact on biodiversity probably in some by the level of weight, as my opinion is controversial, of natural ecosystem to agriculture, use of heavy machinery, specialization, larger parcel size with disappearance of field margins. They can result in degradation, soil degradation, simplifying of ecosystem, and uncontrolled spread of alien and wild species. So the most relevant practices and technologies that should underpin the mandatory requirements or probably voluntary ecoschemes should be the following. Measures that will enhance natural and semi-natural ecosystem, because of, as we say, the land flowing in Ukraine is highest in the world. In the original version of National Soil Conservation Program, 9 million hectares of arable eroded land were planned to be decommissioned, of which 7 million hectares were proposed for afforestation and 2 hectares for transform into meadows and pasture. Measures that counteract soil degradation. The problem of soil degradation affects 20% of agricultural land. The most dangerous form in Ukraine are water and wind erosion, which are most evident in the steppe conditions in the east of the country. Probably the next measure to promote soil fertility. For more than 100 years, humus losses account for 22% in the forest steppe, almost 20% in the steppe, and almost 19% in the Polissa. So it is very important for us. Some measures promoting biodiversity and protecting ecosystem. We have already said something about this, and measures to improve efficiency of crop production. For example, agroforestry system include both traditional and modern land use system, where forest management involves the cultivation of crops and livestock system. So some of them, analyze some of them. Permanent meadows and pasture are land that used for growing grass for 5 years or more. The rationale of permanent pasture to farmland must be determined on the basis of regional agri-environment approach, as well as a list of plants for sowing and the creation of semi-natural areas. In Europe, for example, by supporting this practice, the risk of permanent meadows flowing is reduced by approximately 13 million hectares. Forestation. Forest has a positive effects on the climate, soil, condition of formation of surface runoff, and many others. At the conference, our future Commissioner Hogan announced a potential initiative to encourage member states to reward farmers with payments for the afforestation of 1 hectare. But for example, we have to increase share of new areas foreseen for afforestation in the Polissa and western region of Ukraine, but we have to limit afforestation of steppe areas in the southern and eastern part regions of Ukraine, and we have to emphasize as much as possible on the restoration of lost and creation of new windbreaks. Next. As we said, that the most dangerous form of soil degradation in Ukraine are water and wind erosion. So forest strips and hedges, they provide so many of everything, so many ecosystem services, and they extremely important in agriculture because 1 hectare of forest stripes protects 20, 30 hectares of arable land with yield increase of about 15%. Hedge crops and cover crops. Criticism of this measure, for example, in Germany, is very interesting. Due to easy implementation, hedge crops make more than 2/3 of the ecologic focus areas registered by German farmers, and considering that the benefits for biodiversity are limited, it is highly questionable if such high share of hedge crops and therefore the current policy design contributes to assume the positive biodiversity effects of the greening. In Ukraine, for example, the use of cover crops in some region may be limited as they may not allow time to development, especially in autumn, end of autumn and winter times. Crop rotation has been a self-evident for generations of farmers worldwide and for hundreds of years in Europe. According to common agricultural policies, crop rotation will replace crop diversification, and the difference is far from trivial. Diversification allows as much as 70% of a holding arable land to be the same crop year after year, and requires at least 2 additional crops, which could also be continuous cropping on the remaining land, but rotation requires any parcel of arable land to be planted with at least 3 different crops over 3 years, including nitrogen fixing plants. Okay, so crop rotation has many agronomic, economic, and environmental benefits. This measure is very important. Again, according to German analysis, nitrogen fixing crops have significantly high level of consumption in some states. It is related to agricultural structures and crop rotation. They are valued in the southern states with long period of harvest. They valued for the support of soil fertility and particularly popular in the eastern lands with large fields. Maybe I think this is not much time I have. Sorry. So I think that I will stop on this slide. European agriculture policy has a lot of criticism in its address, and most common requires find ways to simplify, to be more efficient, and to be more friendly for small and medium farmers, and probably it may be a little bit unusual, but I really ask your advice for Ukraine. Probably you can say something what we should and should not integrate from agriculture, agrarian policy. For sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Iryna, for your, I would say, pioneer work for Ukraine. No one except our organization is bothering about these things. And I feel especially big pressure for Ukraine because we really have that fertile lands, and we are at a big risk with this land market that everything will be just total not eco-intensive, but machine-intensive agriculture. So we really need to do something. Yeah, so if you have any questions, you can ask Iryna in the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask. So I will then ask my question. Do you know about the new edition of Common Agriculture Policy and regarding to this regulation for the ecological focus area? Is it still permitted to grow there like the catch crops and other service crops, or there should be different measures? And if they are different, so which exactly measures?
No, it will be almost the same measures. They change. It will be called not ecological focus areas, but not non-productive land, something like this. And the biggest change is that member states will decided what to propose to farmers and decided what measures they be supporting.
Mm-hmm. And regarding to this service crops, I just wonder, I also know this information that farmers prefer to grow the most useful crops for them, like this nitrogen fixing cover crops. Do you know, in the existing agro-environmental schemes in Europe, are there any requirements that they should plant diversity of different crop types as a service crops or cover crops or catch crops? Or they can just choose whatever cover crops they like and they receive benefits or subsidies?
I know that again in new edition, it for sure they the 15% of crop rotation land must be under nitrogen fixing crops. So this is the main requirements for now.
And maybe just the last question from Robert. Do you have any kind of support for organic farming? Any strategic plan at the moment at Ukraine level to increase the number of organic farms?
No, unfortunately, we have some state plans that say, okay, it will be great if you will provide organic farming, but any economic support they don't want to give to farmers. So it's only for them. If you want to provide organic agriculture, you will do this. If you don't want, you have no any how to say privilege.
Privileges, yeah.
Privilege, yes.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Iryna, for this wonderful presentation. We definitely don't finish with this topic. We continue with conference resolution, article, policy recommendations. So you all will be still contacted and asked your feedback.